Welcome back.
Hello.
This is episode 512 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. And the 512th episode of Santa Barbara aired August 4th, 1986, which is a Monday. I presume we're into the August sweeps now. Santana tells Cruz she didn't know she had hit Eden with her car and that she didn't get out. And Cruz said, well, Eden remembers someone getting out, but Santana does not reveal she was with Keith. Paul arrives and realizes quite quickly that Santana is the one that hit Eden, and Cruz orders him to do nothing. The pharmacology reports arrives at Keith's desk, and he sees that Santana has been taking a psychoactive drug. Santana calls to tell him that if Cruz arrests her, she's taking him down too. Cruz questions Keith about Inspiration Point, and Keith says, nice view, long drop. As he leaves, a call comes in. Suspecting it's Santana, Cruz picks up the phone at Christine's desk, which is Keith's secretary. Then Keith tries to get Paul to take over Santana's case from Cruz, but Paul says, I only take orders from Inspector Castillo. So Paul's keeping quiet, but he was not too happy that Cruz wanted to suppress this, even though, Cruz didn't say he was going to do that forever. Paul says, well, I got a couple hours worth of paperwork. And Cruz took that the wrong way. Keith tells Santana that he can get the charges reduced if Cruz arrests him, not to worry. Santana goes to Rosa and tells her to take care of Brandon and Cruz. She says goodbye to Brandon. So I looked up ahead on IMDb. Is Gina Gallego leaving the show? Santana arrives at the beach house and tells Cruz, I didn't leave the country. So I guess she is not leaving the show. She's surprised when Cruz says he hasn't told anyone about the fact that she ran over Eden. And then she thinks it's a trick to get her to confess. She says, the only difference between an accident and intentional is malice aforethought. She says, I've never been in short supply of malice towards Eden. So she asks for a lawyer. However, Stu arrives at the door with an arrest warrant from the DA for Santana. So I think maybe Keith decided to get ahead of it by having Santana arrested on his own so he can control what happens. But I suspect Santana may take things the wrong way, and maybe that might not go well for Keith.
Yeah. I was suspecting maybe he will try and use this arrest as leverage over Cruz and, at various points say, well, I could continue with this unless you do whatever. So that was how I took it. As you say, trying to get control over the situation. I am a little bit concerned going into this sweeps about whether Cruz has kind of left himself exposed in some ways. And also I did notice, I think Cruz actually uttered a threat against Keith during this episode where he threatened to kill him. So that made me wonder if perhaps Keith might be in a bit of danger here, and if that could bounce back on Cruz.
We will see how that goes. Gina waltzes back into the Capwell mansion with the invitation in hand and complains to Cecil and Sophia that 2 weeks is such short notice. Are you sure Kelly's going to be able to make it to the wedding? Sophia wonders why Gina is so concerned with Kelly lately. Dr. Rawlings arrives and tries to convince Cece and Sophia that Pearl may have kidnapped Kelly, but Cece isn't buying that at all. Rawlings tells Cece that, if Kelly escaped on purpose, that might mean she's ready to stand trial. Gina is listening at the door. She's very concerned that things will happen in the right sequence. Sophia tells Gina to keep out of family business. And then Gina doesn't care for Rosa's smile as Cece kicks her out. Rosa says, it's a special smile I reserve for you. Gina goes to Keith's office to leave a note for him. And she spots the analysis paper on his desk and realizes that Keith knows that Santana's been taking crack. Pearl, Kelly, and Owen are in Michael's apartment, listening to Dr. Rawlings and Dr. Bellows as they search Pearl's apartment. Kelly is impressed by all of Pearl's fancy books. Courtney walks in and is annoyed by how touchy-feely Pearl and Kelly seem to be. Owen decides that he can never go back to the Institute and wants to get a job at the phone company. He says, I'm not certain whether I want to climb a pole or tell people whatever number they want. Courtney tells Pearl she should be happy to see him since she flew across the country to be with him, and thinks Kelly is very dependent on him. He says they all became dependent on each other at the Institute. Kelly asks if Courtney and Pearl are going back to Boston together. Pearl says to her, I thought we were a team. He asks Kelly to come to Boston with him. And Kelly says, I don't think Courtney would like that. So it seems like Pearl is really pursuing Kelly in this episode, even though he's trying to tell Courtney she has nothing to worry about. But of course, he's never told Courtney that he loves her, as far as I recall. And is just trying to have it both ways with Courtney and Kelly, which is a bit surprising.
Yeah, I have to admit that since Pearl kind of blew off Courtney the first time around and has been chasing Kelly, I've actually had a lot less sympathy for him as a character because I really felt that he and Courtney were a good match, and she's basically become a doormat, which is a bit disappointing. She's even busy trying to get a boat trip together to smuggle them all out of the country. So, she's really putting herself in a lot of jeopardy for someone who's really not that into her at this point.
Courtney asks Pearl about Macintosh. He says, I don't even know if that's a person, and then wonders, who is that other guy with Dr. Rawlings? And Pearl says, well, that's Dr. Bellows. Next thing we know, Courtney's in disguise as Miss Beddington, who is interviewing Dr. Bellows. She convinces him that Dr. Rawlings is getting all the glory and he should be getting more of the credit. And Dr. Bellows at one point says, yes, he does seem to be using a lot of my ideas. And then she asks him about Macintosh. And after a few seconds, he realizes who Courtney is talking about. He says, oh, I haven't really seen her since she and Dr. Rawlings got divorced. So we find out that Priscilla is Dr. Rawlings' ex-wife, and she lives in Ensenada. So once again, another trip to Mexico is in order. He puts his hand on her hand, and she tells him she's a lesbian.
Which is actually a pretty racy thing to say back in the 80s on network TV.
Dr. Bellows was just so happy to have some attention that I think he was getting a bit too excited. Courtney brings the news to Pearl, and she says, and I've rented a boat to take us all to Mexico. So I feel like she just doesn't want to leave Kelly and Pearl out of her sight for a second. Courtney goes to bring Kelly to their safe house, hotel room that Courtney's also rented. And Pearl knocks on Cece's door. But before Cece can get too angry, he says that Kelly is fine and he's going to take Cece to Kelly. So I don't see why this plan shouldn't go smoothly, because presumably, plot-wise, we have to make it to Ensenada to visit Dr. Rawlings' wife so she can tell us all the secrets. She'll reveal that he's secretly evil and he'll be put in jail and Kelly will be freed.
Well, I think the Kelly will be freed thing really plays more into Gina having the tape and that whole part of the plot line. I actually must admit I'm getting a bit tired of the Kelly Pearl mental institution plot line next to some of the others that are going on. But maybe this trip to Mexico will kind of take things in another direction.
Yep, I think we have another direction starting in a couple of weeks based on just some of the IMDb things that I remember. So I think it sort of came to a head in the mental institution with Pearl being strapped in for his lobotomy, and I just have a feeling they're not going back there, and this is moving forward outside of the Institute from this point on. It's because it seems like in this episode they pretty much decided, Owen's going to be fine on his own. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't even see Owen again. They go, yeah, he's got a job at the phone company, just like you said. They're gonna take off with whatever they find out in Ensenada. Wrap up the story. So that Kelly can start her trial, so that Gina can pull out the tape and say whatever she's gonna say to Cece. That's it for the Monday episode. We'll be back after we watch episode 513. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Well, when the fox and the chicken get together, we all know there's trouble in the barnyard, don't we?
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've seen episode 513 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Tuesday, August 5th, 1986. Pearl and Kelly meet Cece and Sophia at the hotel. And Cece wants to check Kelly into a different mental institution to complete her road to wellness. Kelly says, the only one who's helped me is with Pearl, so I'm going to stick with Pearl. She also thinks that there's no way that another institution would accept her after what she's done unless they completely clear themselves. She says she's going to go with Pearl to track down evidence against Rawlings. Owen calls Rawlings, who has promised him his release, as we remember. And they capture Courtney when she arrives at Michael's apartment, and then try to grab Kelly and Pearl, but they manage to escape with Courtney. Owen reveals to Rawlings that they're headed for Mexico to find Macintosh, which doesn't horrify Rawlings as much as you would hope. We were kind of hoping Macintosh would have some sort of smoking gun, but Rawlings doesn't seem to care. He just tells Owen to catch up with them and keep him posted from Mexico.
I kept thinking as I was watching this that all of the things Rawlings and his crew are doing seem to be highly illegal, breaking into people's places and capturing Courtney, and it seemed to me to be really quite risky for them, because remember, Courtney is a Capwell, as is Kelly. So
at one point, Courtney says, do you know who I am? And he says, you're the person who just aided and abetted to escape fugitives. So I think Rawlings thinks that's enough to keep her from reporting him for those things, but I don't know.
Yeah, plus we know that Pearl's family is also quite influential as well. So I feel like we're seeing a little bit of a reckless side to Dr. Rawlings.
Yeah, maybe he thinks he's got more power than he does. I mean, certainly floundering, trying to keep Cece at bay. The orderlies that had chased after Kelly and Pearl get to the boathouse just as Kelly and Pearl and Courtney are trying to untie the dinghy that's going to take them to the Capwell yacht. And actually, is it the Capwell yacht? I thought Courtney said she hired a boat, but then I thought someone said Capwell yacht at one point. But anyway, the Courtney, who's untying the ropes and is still on the dock, ends up kind of throwing herself in the way of the orderlies to give Kelly and Pearl time to cast off and get away. And then later, when we see them on the yacht, Owen has somehow managed to join them, and they head to Mexico.
And we see in the conversations between Pearl and Kelly and Owen at this point that, Kelly is still very much concerned about Owen and making sure he's all right. But I think Pearl is becoming a little more suspicious of Owen. He's kind of just the tone of his voice in that. I think maybe Pearl is kind of wondering how Dr. Rawlings managed to find them so quickly, and suspecting there might be a mole in their midst.
Now, when they did arrive, one of the orderlies was holding Owen to make it look good. But yeah, maybe Pearl was not buying that. Courtney is brought back to Rawlings, and he says, perhaps Pearl has the wrong girl along with him, and perhaps you share that opinion with me. I don't think he's going to get Courtney's help against Pearl if that's what he's thinking.
No, he's trying a little bit of cheap psychological manipulation here, which, as much as anything tells us about his character as it does about his chances of success with Courtney.
Presumably, the next stop will be Macintosh, so we might find out something. Obviously, that's worth finding out in the next episode. Keith grabs Gina as she tries to put the envelope back. Not clear if he knows exactly what she saw. Julia comes in to discuss defending Santana, and Gina is ecstatic that Santana has been arrested. Now, this is actually kind of funny, because Julia is the public defender. She would only really defend you if you had no money, so it's weird that Santana is being defended by Julia.
It is, and I actually, I remember when we first started this podcast, I used to comment quite a bit on the different outfits and everything, and that's kind of fallen by the wayside, but I was a little bit distracted by Julia's outfit in this episode because she's wearing bright yellow and lilac.
I noticed the yellow, and the rest kind of, I guess,
it's just a weird combo.
Blurred itself out of my sight.
Especially with the big, shoulder pads and that from the 80s.
Keith gets Santana alone, and after calming her down by suggesting she take some crack, he tells her the only way out for her is to sign a confession. And this is a half sentence in my summary, but this is several scenes of him trying to convince her that that's the only way he can protect her, and she's clearly not entirely certain that he's still on her side, and that this isn't just some way to get him off. But he says, if anyone even suspects I was in that car, both of us are going to jail.
Which is perhaps true, but I think she is right to be a little bit concerned about where his loyalty lies. I think as an audience, we're always wondering that with Keith, and the fact that he is now actively feeding her crack kind of shows that perhaps he doesn't have her best interests at heart.
I know, this is the thing. I was thinking he was going to say, do you know what's in here? Crack, someone's been poisoning you. But in fact, he does the exact opposite of what I thought he might, and just piles on another one of Kirk's many crimes and misdemeanors, Keith's crimes and misdemeanors that he has piled on in just the few short weeks he's been in the show. He tells her that if she signs the confession, the judge will have to listen to his recommendation to bump the charge down to a misdemeanor. And Julia and Cruz are livid when they show up and find that Santana has signed a confession. And then later that night, Santana finds Cruz staring into the fire, and to everyone's surprise, including ours, he blames himself for everything that's happened for not realizing that Santana was unhappy. Santana was surprised by that too.
Yeah, I think they're really pushing it when we do get to the eventual crack up of this relationship, that this will, I feel, be very much Cruz being pushed over the edge. I think that they really need Cruz to be this honorable person who's we know he's loyal. We've seen him with Joe and we've seen him with Nick. So I think they really need to push him all the way out to end the relationship with Santana.
And I thought things were actually going to smooth over, because I thought, now that Keith knows about the crack, even if he doesn't tell anyone, he's probably going to just secretly switch it back to the proper medication. But no, it looks like this crack storyline may go on a bit. Maybe Keith is planning to let Santana take enough that a refill is needed, and then he'll try to keep an eye on who exactly it is that replaces the bottle when the next refill comes. Then he'll have something on Gina.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Mind you, we also don't know if Keith would be interested in getting his hands into the crack trade too. I mean, maybe
Exactly.
He's looking for, a sign of who's behind this trade.
He and Angel will be working together.
Yeah.
Another thought that occurred to me, is the cycles on soap operas of relationships. Just as one of the two people who's meant to be together gets out of out of their relationship. The other one is stuck, just as Eden got out of the relationship with Kirk. Cruz was trapped in the relationship with Santana. And I was just trying to think, once the Santana thing fails, will Cruz and Eden actually have a time of being together? Or what could the next thing be that keeps them apart? And I don't think it could be another man on Eden's side so soon, which leaves the other thing of Eden being so upset with him for something that he's done, which is maybe defend Santana after it's clear that she's the one that ran Eden over. Could that be something that Eden holds against him for a while? Because there's nothing really... She really wants him today. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we don't know what Cruz is prepared to do to mend his relationship with Santana, so he might take things a few steps farther than Eden would like to see. I'm still thinking that, I'm thinking again of Keith and all his little manipulations. I'm wondering if they will be kept apart by Keith somehow framing Cruz for something. Or if Cruz is going to get caught up on the wrong side of something.
Yeah, because I think Keith's involved in so many things. It's probably a risk for him to keep Cruz around.
Well, we know he hates Cruz. I would say he's far more interested in revenge on Cruz than he actually is on winning Santana's love.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder if the writers already had something in mind for why he hates Cruz so much. I, of course, remember what the reason is, but it's possible that the writers have just a vague idea at this point. But maybe it will be revealed at the reunion, or maybe sometime down the line.
Yeah, I mean, to me, as I said, the fact that he's feeding her crack and manipulating her so much, I feel like Keith is not necessarily into Santana as a person, but more as an object that he wants to pry away from Cruz, or someone he desired in high school and didn't get.
I think maybe when it started, he did want her, but she's been so weird now. But then now that he knows it's the crack, I don't know. But then it was only the crack that was making her interested in him. So Gina brings Cece the good news of Santana's arrest and demands that he immediately take custody of Brandon away from Santana and hand Brandon over to her. Now, I don't know if Cece has that power, but the scene ends with Cece saying, "Oh, do shut up." So I think he's obviously going to check into these things a bit, but at the end of a long day, Julia and Keith have a sleepy, flirty conversation. So I think they are pushing Julia and Keith together. It's another one of these, oh, you really want me? No, I really don't. Well, I wouldn't have you anyway things. So I don't know, I'm kind of enjoying that. Gina barges in to complain that Santana hasn't been charged with murder, instead some lame misdemeanor. Gina looks at the two of them and says, "When the fox and the chicken get together, we know there's trouble in the barnyard." And that is the end of this episode.
We did get one mention, though, of poor old Mason.
That's right. Oh, I totally glossed over that.
Yeah, he's not there. But Cece does mention him because apparently they have actually been worried about him.
Cece gets a phone call from a apparently very drunk Mason. And Cece is saying, "Are you in a church?" Because we hear, I think, music over the receiver. So even though Lane Davies is probably still on vacation and or doing a play somewhere, at least we know people have missed Mason. But it sounds like whoever kidnapped him, who was wearing a white robe, may have just stuck him into a church choir. They needed an extra, I'm going to say, tenor.
Throwing him behind some pews. Yeah, we don't know.
So maybe the next time we see Mason, he'll be singing in a church choir. But he still seemed to be drunk. So it's not like they helped him to dry out, I guess. Unless he was drunk on the Spirit of the Lord. We will see, I think, in a few weeks when Mason returns. And that's it for the Tuesday episode. We'll be back after we've seen episode 514. And we are going to see Jane Sibbett in tomorrow's episode, according to IMDb. And so we are going to go on a very special location shoot, at least for the Jane Sibbett related scenes in tomorrow's episode. So we'll see you then from another country. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We're in Seattle. Welcome to episode 514 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. We are here in Seattle at the Friends exhibit to celebrate Jane Sibbett's appearance on Santa Barbara as Roxanne. Jane Sibbett, of course, after Santa Barbara, went on to co-star in the famous Teddy Z with John Cryer, the poor man's Matthew Broderick, and then she played Carol on Friends. And so we've come to the Friends exhibit in Seattle, the Friends Experience. And let's talk about what happened in episode 514. Haley was sent to cover Santana's trial, so Ted and Jane ended up going for lunch at the Orient Express together. And throughout this episode, it's kind of clear that Jane is interested in Ted. I mean, this is not just a fun thing with Roxanne. She really is interested. She takes off her glasses, and Ted makes a comment how she doesn't look half bad, and then she gets extremely upset by that, because I guess her lifelong bane has been her glasses, and that people don't find her attractive, apparently, when she's wearing them.
I actually like myself better in my glasses, so there you go. It takes all types.
So, you know, they kind of, he tries to ask her about her family, right? And she says, my mom lives in town or something like that, but just mention her dad, and then she doesn't want to talk about it. And then at one point she just jumps up and says, I have to pay for myself, and runs out.
Yeah, she basically flips out during this episode.
It's weird. She goes, oh, you're taking me to this fancy restaurant that your family owns. I'm like, he probably gets a discount there, so it's like the reverse of what you're complaining about. And he's probably going to treat you just because it's his family's place, not for anything else. But it's very odd this episode because they have a discussion later back at her place. He says, oh, I want to be your friend. And she says, oh, yeah, so you can dump me when Haley or someone better comes along. I'm like, does she understand the difference between a friend and a girlfriend? Because if she wants to be his girlfriend, she should make that clear.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see some of her issues and perhaps why she has used Roxanne.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was clear to Ted that Jane was interested in him romantically. I think from that conversation, he could say, well, you're talking about Haley being impediment to our friendship. Clearly you have no romantic interest in me. But I don't think he quite twigged to that, but maybe it'll dawn on him.
And I'm expecting we'll see more and more hypercharged behavior from Jane, or possibly even the reemergence of Roxanne in the coming weeks.
Because when Ted leaves, Jane gets really upset with herself for messing that up. And I'm wondering if she'll, revert back to using Roxanne because, she can hide that way.
Yeah.
And then, once again, still not clear if it could be a split personality or it's just, this anonymous character she can play.
Yeah.
We're standing in front of Monica's kitchen sink, which Jane Sibbett as Carol may well have stood in front of during an episode of Friends. Now, the other main portion of this episode of Santa Barbara was Santana's trial. And Keith tells her to stick to what you signed in the confession. And we find out for the first time that in order to cover Keith, she had to confess that she did get out of the car. Santana takes at least 2 more pills before her testimony, and I think Keith should have been worried about that. He should have maybe swapped them out for real pills. Anyway, she forgets that she had said she forgot out of the car, and the judge has to remind her, and she said, oh, yeah, I did get out of the car. And then the judge says, you know what, we're going to have to take a break, and I'm going to have to talk to you again about this on the stand. And during the break, Gina comes up with a VHS tape and says, if you don't confess, I'm going to play this tape for everyone. And Gina said, oh, I thought you destroyed it. Or Santana says, I thought you destroyed it. But Gina says, oh, I had a copy made. So I'm pretty sure it's not even a real tape. But
It spooks her, though. It spooks Santana.
yeah, she gets on the stand. She's, I think, taking another pill in between. And I don't know if it's because of Gina staring at her the whole time or confusion, but she ends up being very confused on the stand. The judge sees that she's maybe not living up to her actual testimony, and the judge reinstates her original charge. And then Santana freaks out. In the middle of the courtroom, she says, "It's all lies, everything's a lie." She tears up the confession and says, "I'm going to tell everyone the truth right now." Now, I don't know if she really is, or if seeing Gina there threatening her, she's decided she's going to make up a story that will cover her with Gina, or if she's going to tell the truth, which is obviously Keith's fear as he's sitting there wide-eyed when she says she's going to say everything. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think she'll tell some version of the truth, but whether she really even, she's so mixed up. I mean, she's even trying to take pills on the stand at this point.
That's right. And the judge says, "Oh, have you ever had a substance abuse issue?"
And I think it's pretty clear that the judge thinks she does, because she mentions that a few times. And, all through this, we're seeing the look on Keith's face, Rosa, Cruz. We get to see Nick, and they all look horrified. So what was supposed to be a little cakewalk, just, get it done, is going to turn out to be a much bigger problem.
Yeah, so everyone's on pins and needles as to what Santana's going to say. Do you think Santana will end up in jail after this episode?
I don't know. I think that Keith will have to do some pretty fancy maneuvering to get her out of this at this point. Because this is her own words now, and everything can be used against her. So, yeah, we'll have to see.
Julia could object and say, "My client is obviously distraught," and get a break. That's another thing that you never think about in soap operas, but happens quite often, where the cliffhanger gets halted by another party barging in.
Of course, it could be elevated to some sort of a more complicated hearing where Eden's testimony comes in. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
Anything else you want to discuss about this episode? As you said, we did see Nick.
Yeah, we saw Nick.
And I thought Nick had a very nice scene with Julia, and Nick's single. He was going, "I don't know if I'm single or not." Maybe they're testing Nick and Julia to see if they'd make a nice couple.
I'm hoping we'll see a bit more of Nick, and I'm hoping the reason he was in this episode is because they have some really good ideas for him.
And then the other potential couple that was kind of flirting a bit today was Gina and Keith, in their manner of flirting by threatening each other. So if they decide Keith is better off with Gina and Julia's better off with Nick, that's a potential combination. Trying to think who else.
It would be very transactional with these two, which is always fun to see.
Yeah, that would be a fun pairing too. And then maybe, I think the most sensible pairing would have been Janice and Nick, but we haven't seen Janice for a long time. So we'll see of all the single people in town who ends up together. And I think that is it for episode 514. We couldn't remember anything else while we were taking our notes in the restaurant this morning, trying to remember what we'd seen yesterday. So we'll be back in Vancouver tomorrow with episode 515 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Sure, you need one of those? It's going to be over soon.
No, the pills help.
But you just took one at the house.
But she's allergic to justice. I'll have the chef's salad with a side of extra dressing.
I'll wait. What, does the competition pay you to eat here?
We are back
Hello.
in Vancouver after a whirlwind trip to Seattle, where the only good thing that happened to us was the Friends experience. While we were there, we did our Wednesday episode podcast, and maybe ran into a potential new fan in the line. So if our numbers go up by one, well, no, it's that person we ran into at the experience.
Or a new bot.
We've watched episode 515 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Thursday, August 7th, 1986. In the evening, we have been getting through Quincy, and Louise Sorel was in an episode of Quincy, second season, I believe. first, if you don't count the NBC Mystery Wheel episodes. And she very cleverly took a role that required her to be in a hospital bed, because every single one of her scenes was a close-up. And we also saw Henry Darrow, future Cruz's dad, on Hawaii Five-0, season 8 Hawaii Five-0 that we watched on Friday.
And we saw Cece Capwell.
Oh, that's right. We saw Charles Bateman in what? I can't remember what it was.
I want to say Canon, but
I want to say Canon, too.
yeah.
We're currently on early season 2 of Canon. Back in Santa Barbara, Pearl helps Kelly remember that she pushed someone out a window. They, of course, are on a yacht headed for Mexico, and we find out that they are not planning to legally enter Mexico. They have brought no passports or anything and are going to sneak into the country.
So this is kind of an interesting reversal. Usually we hear about people illegally entering the United States from Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Here we have the opposite.
I mean, it's weird that they wouldn't just take their passports with them, because there's probably not a manhunt from them on the Mexican side, especially if they're going by water. Maybe coming back, I could see why you'd want to sneak back into California with, 2 escapees on the loose. But maybe they're worried they will be caught at the border. Then, unexpectedly, Pearl finds a guitar and makes up a song about Kelly, which one of us didn't like at all. I think it was you.
Yeah, I wasn't really that turned on by it myself. To me, it was kind of on par a little bit with, I don't know if you remember Cheers, where Woody Harrelson's character writes a song for his Kelly.
Kelly, 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 Kelly. Is that the one?
Yeah, I liked that one better.
That's true, yeah. That was a better one. Anyway, he finally stops, and I guess that gives Kelly's mind enough room to remember that it was Dylan that she had pushed out the window, but she still doesn't quite remember why. And Pearl sort of alternates between pushing her to remember and saying, "Oh, there's no rush." Owen is a bit scared when he hears that Kelly killed someone, but Pearl assures him he's not her next target. Gina appears on television to assure her customers that the safety of Mrs. Capwell's cookies is her top priority, and that they are now individually checked, and each cookie is wrapped, as well as each box as well. This is, of course, a reference to some drug tampering that occurred in the United States in 1982. Some Tylenol was tampered with, and in '86, the year this year, there was also some Excedrin tampering in Washington. But I think it's the Tylenol one that people remember, and that changed the drug laws in the U.S. And that is why there is a seal on top of your bottle, as well as being a plastic wrap around the lid, as well as them being a sealed cardboard box around that, to make tampering more evident. Interesting that with probably those people being their advertisers, they would even do a storyline that references it.
Yeah, and actually, I know here that Tylenol you cannot get in capsule form anymore because capsules can be easily broken. They're just solid little pills.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
But it was interesting to me. I was just trying to think through the logistics of if Gina was actually doing that. Of course, Gina's probably not doing that, but just the amount of machinery and sort of logistical strategy you would need to actually carry that out. I think that would be something you'd get more from a big corporation than someone just baking cookies out of a house they're squatting in.
Yeah, or is she doing it on the yacht? Either way, I'm not really sure how they got contaminated. If she was just doing normal, food handling things, maybe they were contaminated by, whatever event the people were at. The person who put out the food maybe had dirty hands or something, and that's how they got contaminated. Santana, of course, was about to tell the court the whole truth, and she says that Keith Timmons was in the car with her and that she's been having an affair with him. Cruz is kind of saddened to hear that. Keith denies everything, It says that she's just angry because he couldn't get the charges dropped like he had said he might be able to do.
And Keith is he's basically doing everything he can think of during Santana's testimony to get her to shut up.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really incriminating himself a lot in the process.
Mm-hmm. And Santana ends up slapping Keith several times in the hallway after. Now, the judge does ask again a couple times if she's had substance issues. And, I'm really surprised that Keith didn't say, I just got this report that came in that might explain why Santana's making up this weird story completely out of nowhere, because she's on crack right now. And it's weird that he's holding back on that.
Yeah, I feel like he's waiting on that for something. I feel like he will use it because he does use these things, but for some reason this wasn't the moment for him.
Julia tells Keith that she believes Santana because why would she make up a story that would make her look so bad? Santana and Cruz end up talking about the affair, and Cruz says, I was faithful to you, and she says, well, you weren't in your heart. And then Cruz wonders if she maybe hit Eden on purpose, which kind of throws Santana for a loop. She says, you've known me since I was a kid. Then later Santana gets upset when she hears Rosa and Cruz talking about who's going to take care of Brandon when Santana's in jail.
Yeah.
Now Gina sends Keith a note to meet her at the movie theater and says that she can help him. And they actually briefly discuss the crack, and I think Gina says, we kind of have a perfect out here for Santana. And he says, well, then the next question is going to be who was tampering with her pills, and I don't think you want that coming out. So he reveals that he knows that she's the one who did it. So maybe that's part of the reason why he didn't reveal it in court, because he knew that would go down another path, but I don't see why he would care if it led to Gina. That would still help him.
Yeah, unless he kind of likes holding that as leverage for Gina as well.
I don't know what Gina might have that he could use. So.
Well, I mean, we'll see if she can somehow get back. I mean, he doesn't know anything about her tape with Kelly, but maybe he feels like with all of her machinations, if she does get Brandon back, she will be perhaps more associated with the Capwell family. That maybe, it might be useful to have her in a little bit more powerful position down the road and use that leverage.
Back in Judge Wiley's office, Keith says he can prove he wasn't in Santana's car that night. So I suspect that when Gina says she could help him, that perhaps she's going to provide an alibi for Keith. Maybe combine it with that story about the motel, because Keith already has a motel clerk ready to agree that he was there, and Gina does have that Spanish wig that she was wearing before. Maybe she can say, haha, it was actually me with Keith in the hotel that night.
Possibly. And one thing that is mentioned in this is, I can't remember, maybe it was Keith, who reminds Cruz that the witness that Cruz had all lined up only testified to seeing a dark-haired woman in the car. He didn't mention a second person. So I think Keith is really lining Santana up to take the fall if he has to. If it's between Keith being in trouble or Santana, I think, despite all his professed love for Santana, I think Keith will save his own skin first.
We still haven't had the class reunion.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Object of conversation at the reunion by, hopefully we'll see a few extras as fellow classmates. That is it for the Thursday episode, and we'll wrap up the week with the Friday, August 8th episode. Episode number 516. We will see you in a few minutes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Earl, the past isn't something that's just finished.
Welcome back.
Hello.
This week, I was going to have my Friends mug in the background, but I cannot find it. So instead, I have the Friends Season 2 DVD set, as well as this bottle that I got when I was in the audience at an NBC show. It may well have been Friends, or it might have been Frasier, or possibly Becker.
Do you have a boyfriend?
But when I find the Friends mug, we'll have another
It's
one.
serious.
I'm wearing the
The
Santa
man
Barbara
has
shirt.
not been born yet that could handle a woman like me.
And one thing I wanted to mention that Christine, Keith Timmons' secretary, has been in her final episode. Mary Elena Beer, B-E-I-R, appeared in 2 episodes as Christine, episode 497 and episode 512. I don't know if he'll get a new secretary after this point, or if they'll just do away with that. And Judge Wiley has also made her last appearance, played by Hildy Brooks. Her 3 episodes were 514, 515, and 516. Let's start with the very slow boat to Ensenada, which, by the way, is a port, which wouldn't be obvious from watching this episode, and is only like 100 kilometers south of the border. So I don't know why Pearl's talking about 2 more days. But Pearl helps Kelly remember that Dylan was trying to make love to her in the penthouse, and then she wonders if maybe she did kill Dylan in cold blood. And they dock outside of Ensenada, which is weird. But then later he sends Owen to get some engine oil, so maybe they ran out of oil. They get some food at a cantina, and Owen uses the payphone to call Dr. Rawlings to let them know that they've docked in Mexico and are about an hour away from Ensenada.
And Owen manages to be not only a mole in this episode, but he's also a big buzzkill. He complains about the village where they land and how everything's depressing, and he complains enough that they have to pack up their beautiful Mexican meal and go and eat it on the boat. So he's not really being a very enjoyable companion.
No, and he's also complaining about the murderer on board.
Yes.
Kelly reveals to Pearl that she only drinks diet soda, to which Pearl replies, "You don't need to be on a diet. You're wonderful." And Kelly says it's great that she has found a friend who doesn't have any romantic interest in her. Which I feel is possibly not what Pearl wanted to hear, because he clearly has fallen for Kelly, as so many people do when her mind has been scrambled by someone.
Yeah, he's firmly in the friend zone as far as Kelly is concerned at this point. And I do wonder if Pearl tries to shift things out of the friend zone, if this will have a negative effect on Kelly, because this is when things tend to go wrong in her relationships with the men who fall in love with her.
And if we remember the parallel of Nick, she had her amnesia when she fell in love with Nick, and then later one kind of wonders if she would maybe have made that decision if she'd been in her right mind. I feel like Pearl may also not be the right kind of guy for Kelly Capwell in this grand scheme of things.
And it actually does not bode well for Pearl that, Kelly actually fell for Nick when she was not in her right mind. She is not in her right mind right now, really, and she's not falling for Pearl.
No, exactly. So it's even worse for him. Haley catches Jane putting on fake fingernails. So my theory of her having a secret room is not true. She actually does that in the middle of the living room.
But I felt sort of vindicated because early on when we met Jane and when we were first introduced to the whole Roxanne storyline, the one reason why I thought it might not be Jane is because putting on those fingernails and becoming Roxanne would be such a time-consuming process. And we actually do see in this episode that it is a time-consuming, very conscientious process.
We see her take her glasses off, which is interesting, because she's already got 9 fingernails on at this point. So presumably she actually needed them to see what she was doing. Haley wonders if perhaps Jane secretly has a boyfriend, and Jane says, "The man has not been born yet that could handle a woman like me." Ted comes over to try and make things better with him and Haley, and once again their conversation degenerates badly, and she ends up storming out. Jane has a bit of a conversation with Ted then, and he goes off to work. And of course, Jane knows he's gone there. So Roxanne phones in and invites Ted out. And he says, no, I just started this shift, but maybe you can come to the radio station. So Jane shows up at work, pretending that she's got a lot of work to do. And Ted's trying to get rid of her because he's waiting for Roxanne. And he reveals that to Jane. And Jane says, oh, perhaps I'll interview Roxanne. Ted reluctantly ends up telling Jane that she can, continue to be there. And I guess he'll figure something out if he wants some private time with Roxanne when she shows up.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if Jane's going to make a move on Ted tonight or reveal that she's Roxanne or show up in the booth with her Roxanne getup on. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering, as we were just saying, she was putting on these long fingernails, and it seemed to be a very labor-intensive process. And then she just became Jane, so I guess she undid all that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really seeing any evidence for my split personality theory, though. I think it's just her costume that she hides behind.
Mm-hmm.
Cruz is annoyed that Eden has showed up. She did phone him yesterday, which we didn't mention, and say she was coming in. He says, no, do not come back. And, of course, she's back. So I guess Marcy Walker has had her vacation. Mm-hmm. And the half of the cast that's missing is still on theirs. Gina testifies that she and Keith have been having an affair and were together on the night of the hit and run. She says that she wanted Eden to get back with Cruz because then she could get her son back from Santana. Mm-hmm. So she lays out the 100% truth of her motivation for everything, which everyone really has to believe because it's the truth. And it meshes with, Eden has shown up in the courtroom by now. So really from Eden's perspective, she has no reason to believe Gina's made anything up because it's all very believable and largely true.
And we do see a lot of eye play and that between Gina and Keith during her testimony. So we know that they're playing a game, but in a way it almost makes it believable that they have a connection where they might have slept together.
Mm-hmm. And Gina does go a little above and beyond in describing the passion that they had. Mm-hmm. But then she goes off script, which Keith is angry with her for later, and says, now that I think about it, I did have a note on my desk where I noted that Eden was gonna be up at Inspiration Point that night. I wonder if Santana saw that note when she used my phone. Mm-hmm. And then she starts to say that lately Santana has been bad-mouthing Eden and would fly into a rage just at the sound of her name. And when Santana comes up on the witness stand, the judge tries to get her to say exactly how she feels about Eden and manages to get cornered into saying, I hate Eden!
Yeah, this is one of those things where, of course, Gina does what Gina does. She takes it too far. But then Santana basically backs up her point by going ballistic on the stand and off. She almost gets herself thrown out of the courtroom a few times. Cruz
tries to usher her out at this point, but not before Santana can shout into the courtroom, I hate you all! And then Santana tells Cruz that they should just leave town with Brandon, which Cruz does talk her out of it. The judge orders Santana to stand trial for hit-and-run driving and attempted vehicular manslaughter. So it couldn't really have gone any worse for Santana. And then they did a really groovy thing. When everyone was sitting in the hallway, they had Cruz and Eden lock eyes, and suddenly all the other actors vanished off the screen. So that was a really cool effect. And they just looked at each other with love in their eyes. So that doesn't bode well for Santana either.
No, and it's interesting because when Eden gave her testimony, it was very straightforward testimony. There wasn't really anything in it to spark Santana off, but she blew up anyway.
Because Eden, I don't know if it was this episode, it must have been because we haven't seen her for a while, where she says, yeah, I don't have any reason to believe that Santana would have done this on purpose.
Yeah.
You know, I've known her since we were kids.
So it definitely, even apart from Santana's disastrous testimony, her reactions to the other people who were taking the stand and her basically completely off the rails behavior just while being in the court proceeding probably did her as much damage as what was said on the stand.
Mm-hmm. The crack is probably to blame for.
Well, of course, but
so really, Gina's to blame.
Yeah.
And Keith for not taking the pills away.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for our whole week. Week 106. What have we got to look next week forward to? Probably not a reunion. I hope it happens before the end of summer. It's the August sweeps now. And eventually, I assume they'll find Macintosh in Ensenada. And if any of the Lockridges come back from their vacations, I think there's still actually a while left on that. And who knows where Mason really is.
I imagine in real life the actor is busy doing a play or something, but...
I think so, yeah.
So it might be a while before we see Mason again.
Quite often when Mason goes off to do these plays, he comes back with whatever beard he had for that production. So.
Whatever Shakespearean play he happened to be in.
We had a full credits this time around, a full cast credits. Owen is played by Gary Allen. Judge, Hildy Brooks, and Woman in the Cantina, Silvana Gallardo. And 2 cast members have been removed from the credits. The expected Mark McCormick, but unexpectedly, someone who's been on the show since episode 1 is suddenly missing from the credits. Rosa Andrade is no longer a cast member of Santa Barbara.
Wow.
So, Rosa and Augusta, both out. So I don't know what their plan is for replacing those people, storyline-wise on the canvas. There's probably 2 or 3 others that we thought would be removed first. That
for sure.
haven't really had storyline. Well, I mean, the one that comes to mind is Nick, so a bit of a surprise. And Paul Whitney, Stoney Jackson, really hasn't had a storyline yet, but presumably they had something planned for him. But maybe it is something to do with Alice. Now that the action has moved away from the Institute, I think if Alice is going to remain a cast member, they're going to have to get her out of there somehow. But maybe once everyone gets back from Ensenada, perhaps they'll get Dr. Rawlings not disbarred, but have his license revoked, and some of his patients will be reevaluated by someone else. And Alice, although she seems pretty bad off, might be allowed to maybe go home and live with a family member or something like that. So, that is it for week 106. We will see you next week for week 107 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
What about Inspiration Point?
Well, nice view, long drop.